Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Welcome to your channel The Anatomy Canvas. In today's class of embryology of the nervous system, we are going to discuss with the development of the prosencephalon, that is both the telencephalon and the diencephalon, and also discuss the development of the cerebral commissures. So first, the development of the prosencephalon. Initially, the transverse section through the forebrain shows the similar pattern as the spinal cord and the medulla. So in this longitudinal section, you can see this is the area of the prosencephalon, this is the area of the mesencephalon, this is the area of the rhombencephalon, and then the spinal cord. Here you can see the prosencephalon now divided into the telencephalon and the diencephalon. Diencephalon again divided into diencephalon 1 and 2, and then the mesencephalon is here, and then the rhombencephalon. Again in this area you can see the prosencephalon is over here developing. This is the area of the diencephalon and the mesencephalon. So prosencephalon consists of telencephalon and the diencephalon. So first we will discuss the diencephalon. The diencephalon is formed from the median portion of the prosencephalon. So please remember, this is the median portion of the prosencephalon from where diencephalon is forming. It consists of the two alar plates and a roof plate. So according to your book, the floor plate and the basal plates do not form. Two alar plates and the roof plates are formed. Choroid plexus is there, the pineal body, epithalamic sulcus, hypothalamic sulcus, and mammillary bodies all will develop from the diencephalon. We will discuss all of these in detail. So here in this diagram you can see this is the area of the forebrain and the prosencephalon which is developing, and here you can see the optic cup or optic vesicle is forming. This is the area of the midbrain and this is the area of the hindbrain. In this diagram you can see the lateral outpocketing are forming, which are forming the cerebral hemisphere. In this area also you can see the olfactory bulb and the optic nerve is growing. Here you can see the midbrain area and then the cerebellum. Again in this diagram, this is the cross section. You can see this is the area of the hypothalamus and this is the area of the thalamus. This is the area of the epithalamus. Again you can see this is the sulcus limitans, and then the alar plates are forming, and then the mesencephalon is here, and here is the cerebellum is forming, and in this area you can see the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hypothalamic sulcus is there, and behind this the infundibulum, and then the mesencephalon, mammillary body is developing. Further development shows this is the area of the thalamus. It has enlarged. Now it occupies most of the space over here, and below this area is the hypothalamus, and behind the thalamus the pineal gland or the epiphysis is developing, and in this area also, in the area of the hypothalamus also, you can see the infundibulum and the optic chiasma as well. So this is the section taken at this level, and in this diagram you can see this is the roof plate, and this roof plate is thin and it consists of the it is only the ependymal roof, and next to it is the epithalamus which will form the pineal body, and then the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So cavity of the diencephalon is called third ventricle, and this third ventricle is connected to the cerebral aqueduct in the mesencephalon, and on each side to the cavities of the lateral ventricles, which are cavities present in the telencephalon. So here again in this diagram you can see these are the two optic vesicles which are present. These are the two lateral outgrowth that appear on each side of the forebrain. And also remember that these two optic vesicles appear even before the appearance of the telencephalon, and these two vesicles they form the primordia of the retina and the optic nerve. The cerebral vesicle are the second pair of the outgrowth. So these are the cerebral vesicles. These are second pair of the outgrowth, and they will form the cerebral hemispheres, and their cavity is called the lateral ventricle. So telencephalon is anterior portion of the forebrain and diencephalon is posterior. This one is the anterior portion or rostral portion, and this is a more median portion or posterior part of the forebrain, which is forming the diencephalon. So prosencephalon, the roof plate remains epithelial. Here in this section you can see this is the roof plate and it remains epithelial, and it is invaginated by the vascular mesenchyme, which will form the tela choroida of the third ventricle. Again, the floor plate thickens, and as the nuclear masses of the thalamus, hypothalamus and subthalamus develop. So in this diagram you can see this is the area of the developing thymus. This is the area where interventricular foramen or foramen of Monro will be present. This is the area of developing corpus striatum. This is the area of developing hypothalamus, and here will be the area of developing epithalamus. This rostral limit is called the rostral limit of the most cranial part of the diencephalon. This is called the lamina terminalis. So these are the different areas. The rostral limit of median part of the forebrain is thin sheet called lamina terminalis. So again you can see this is the rostral limit of median part, and this is the lamina terminalis. Again look at this. This is the area of developing thalamus. This is the area of developing corpus striatum. This is the area of developing hypothalamus. So sulcus between thalamus and hypothalamus is called hypothalamic sulcus. Similarly, the area which will develop into the epithalamus, so the sulci which will be present between thalamus and epithalamus will form the epithalamic sulcus. Again in this diagram you can see this is the rudiment of thalamus which is developing, and this area is the rudiment of the corpus striatum, and this is the area of the hypothalamus, and this is the area of the epithalamus. So this sulcus is hypothalamic sulcus, which divide this area into the thalamus and the hypothalamus. This area is development of the rudiment of the corpus striatum. This corpus striatum, as it gives a striated appearance, so it is called corpus striatum. Here will be the interventricular foramen of Monro, and this foramen of Monro, through this foramen both the lateral ventricles and the third ventricles are connected to each other, and in the roof you can see this is the choroidal plexus which is forming over here. This is the rostral limit of median part of the forebrain, that is the lamina terminalis, and below and behind the lamina terminalis you can see this is the optic chiasma, and then the hypophysis cerebri is present. So behind this diencephalon, here is the area of the mesencephalon, and then the rhombencephalon is developing. So what is diencephalon? That is broadly divided by hypothalamic sulcus into dorsal and ventral parts. So this is hypothalamic sulcus, and this is divided into dorsal part and ventral part. Dorsal part formed in the thalami, the metathalamus and the epithalamus, and ventral part will form the hypothalamus and the mammillary bodies. So these are the different parts of the diencephalon. This is dorsal part which will develop into thalami, the metathalami, that is both medial and lateral geniculate bodies, and then the epithalamus which will form the pineal gland over here in this area, the pineal gland, also the posterior commissure, the habenular commissure, this all the structure collectively called epithalamus. So these three main structures, they are formed from the dorsal part of the diencephalon, and from the ventral part of the diencephalon the hypothalamus and mammillary body will be formed. Also the optic chiasma and the hypophysis cerebri will also form. So in this diagram, further developmental stages, you can see this blue is the interventricular foramen. Here you can see thalamus has enlarged in sides. It develops rapidly and it bulges into the cavity of the third ventricle. And when it enlarges, it is attached to the thalamus of the opposite side, and both thalamus are attached to each other, forming the interthalamic adhesions. This is the area of the epithalamus. Here you can see pineal gland is developing. This appear as an outpocketing. Later will form the pineal gland, and in addition to pineal gland, the epithalamus will also form the habenular nuclei and habenular commissure and the posterior commissure. This sulcus is the epithalamic sulcus, and this sulcus is the hypothalamic sulcus, and this is the area of the hypothalamus which is developing. This is anterior limit or cranial limit, lamina terminalis is forming, so hypothalamus is there. This is the area where the hypophysis cerebri and optic chiasma is developing. So these are the different parts. Let's have a look at the slide. The thalamus develops rapidly and bulge into cavity of third ventricle, as you can see in this diagram. Hypothalamus arises by proliferation of the neuroblast. In the intermediate zone of diencephalon, and epithalamus develops from roof and dorsal portion of the lateral wall of the diencephalon. So here is the epithalamus that develops from roof and dorsal portion of the lateral wall of the diencephalon. Again, all these developmental stages, first you can see here developing thalami, developing hypothalamus. This is the interventricular foramen and lamina terminalis. With further differentiation, you can see the developing corpus striatum, the developing thalamus, the developing hypothalamus. Here will be developing epithalamus, and here you can see optic chiasma and hypophysis cerebri. Further developmental stages, here you can see the interventricular foramen. Now it has reduced inside. Initially it was a wider connection. Now the connection has been reduced. This is also called the foramen of Monro. This is the area of developing thymus. This is the area of the developing epithalamus, area of developing hypothalamus, and then the optic chiasma and the hypophysis cerebri. So now we move on to development of the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland develops through two sources. One is hypophyseal diverticulum that develops from the Rathke's pouch of the pharyngeal area, and it develops as an outgrowth and ascends upwards. Here you can see this is the Rathke's pouch which will be forming the hypophyseal diverticulum, and the other derivative is the neurohypophyseal diverticulum which appear from the floor of the diencephalon. So this is the neurohypophyseal diverticulum, and this is the hypophyseal diverticulum which is forming from the Rathke's pouch. These two coming into contact, forming the different parts of the pituitary gland. So here in this diagram you can see the dark blue color shows the area which is developing from the neurohypophysis. So this will form the pars nervosa, that is the posterior lobe, also the infundibular stem, and then the median eminence. The part which is developing from the Rathke's pouch, also called the hypophyseal diverticulum, it will form the pars tuberalis, that is called the anterior lobe, pars tuberalis anterior lobe, and also forming part of the small part of the infundibular stalk as well. So adenohypophysis has all the different types of cells which will form different hormones of the anterior pituitary, and this is the posterior hypophysis or the pars nervosa. So the two derivatives, the pituitary is basically ectodermal in origin, hypophyseal diverticulum from the pharyngeal ectoderm, and neurohypophyseal diverticulum from the neuroectoderm. So it is basically an ectodermal in origin. Now you can see in this diagram, initially look at this. This is the area of developing thymus, and this is the cavity of the diencephalon called third ventricle, and this is the cavity of the telencephalon called the lateral ventricle. Here you can see in the thin roof plate the choroid plexus is forming, and this is the developing cerebral hemispheres which will form lateral ventricle, its cavity, and the hippocampal cortex and the neopallial cortex is developing. In its floor area, in its dorsal area, you can see corpus striatum is forming, and this corpus striatum again consists of two parts, the lateral and the medial part, and this is the area of developing piriform cortex. So here in this diagram you can see again that this is the area of the thalami, which is this is the basically a cross section, and in which you can see these are the two thalami which are attached to each other by the interthalamic adhesions. Here you can see interventricular foramen is present. This is the cavity of the diencephalon, the third ventricle, and this is the cavity of the telencephalon, that is the lateral ventricle. Here you can see this is the choroid plexus which is developing over here, and these two areas you can see the lateral and the medial dorsomedial portion and ventrolateral portion. The dorsomedial portion of corpus striatum will form caudate nucleus, and ventrolateral portion will form the lentiform nucleus, that is putamen and globus pilatus. Initially these thalami are in connection with this ventrolateral portion, but because of the developing fibers of the neocortex, these are the centrifugal fibers which are developing from the neocortex and going downward to midbrain to the lower center, they will form the internal capsule. So as a result of development of the internal capsule, the thalamus will be separated from the this lentiform nucleus, that is putamen and the globus pilatus. In this area you can see the hippocampus is forming over here. Also look at this, fornix is developing over here, and septum pellucidum is forming over here. And here you can see the corpus callosum is developing. So this is the section at the level of the third ventricle, in which you can see the thalami, the corpus striatum, the internal capsule which is forming, the hippocampus, the inferior horn of lateral ventricle is also seen over here, the lateral the cavity of the lateral ventricle, choroid plexus which is forming. Here you can see corpus callosum is developing, and all these areas. So now telencephalon in detail little bit. The telencephalon consists of the cerebral vesicles, that is the two lateral diverticula, the primordia of the cerebral hemispheres. Median portion of the telencephalon form anterior part of third ventricle. At first, the cerebral vesicles are in communication with the cavity of the third ventricle through interventricular foramina. As cerebral hemispheres expands, they meet in the midline. The mesenchyme trapped between them give rise to the falx cerebri, that is fold of the dura mater. Later, the corpus striatum develop as a swelling in the floor of each cerebral hemisphere. So in this diagram you can see this is the entrapped area which will form dura mater over here. This is the cavity of the lateral ventricle. This is the cavity of the third ventricle, and here you can see choroid plexus which will form CSF in this area. This is the area of the corpus striatum, and then the thalami which are developing over here, and hypothalamus which is forming. Here you can see neurohypophyseal diverticulum is developing, and hypophyseal diverticulum which will form the hypophysis cerebri, and these are the all different form. This is the area where interventricular foramen is present, and this is the roof of the third ventricle. So now again have a look at this diagram. Initially the ependymal roof of the diencephalon, and this is developing third ventricle and lateral ventricle which are connected to each other through interventricular foramen. Here is the lamina terminalis. In this section you can see ependymal roof of third ventricle is forming, and this is the direction of the growth of the cerebral hemisphere which will cover all the area of the diencephalon, even the mesencephalon, and also the rhombencephalon as well. So the developing cerebral hemisphere will cover all the areas. In this diagram, you can see this is the interventricular foramen, and then the choroid fissure is present. This is the corpus striatum which is developing. This is the lateral ventricle. In this diagram, you can see the frontal horn of the lateral ventricle and the lateral ventricle and its temporal horn. This is the corpus striatum which is developing, and here you can see the choroidal fissure. In this corpus striatum, you can see this is the lentiform nucleus, and this is the caudate nucleus and its tail. And these are the different parts of the lateral ventricle: the temporal part, the occipital part, and also the frontal part of the lateral ventricle. In this diagram also you can see this is the area of the cerebral hemisphere, and here you can see the infundibular stem. In this diagram, you can see lateral sulcus is developing, growth exceeds, and it covers all the area of the mesencephalon and the rhombencephalon. And this, as a result of which, you can see the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe will form. So these are all the developing areas of the cerebral hemispheres. So now we move on to the cerebral commissures. What are the commissures? These are actually fiber bundles which crosses the midline and connect the two corresponding area of the cortex. So please remember, this is one of my favorite questions in your YY exam. So whenever come to me for your YY, you must know what is commissure. So different fibers, different commissural fibers, you can see this is corpus callosum, the hippocampal commissure, and the anterior commissure, which are developing in a lamina terminalis. Here you can see the optic chiasma, also the habenular commissure and posterior commissure over here. And with further development, you can see the corpus callosum is developing, the hippocampal commissure, the anterior commissure, and also the posterior commissure, the habenular commissure. All these are forming in these areas. So we discuss all of these in detail. So first have a look at this diagram. This is the area of the lamina terminalis, and in this lamina terminalis different commissures will form. So anterior commissure will form in its anterior part, also the hippocampal commissure will form, and these are the other areas. This is the area of the hypothalamus, and here you can see posterior commissure is developing. This is the area of the third ventricle in which hypothalamus is present, and here you can see hypophysis, the optic chiasma, and all these structures are forming. So different commissures which are formed in the cerebral hemispheres, they are in the lamina terminalis. These are anterior commissure, the hippocampal commissure, the corpus callosum, optic chiasma, habenular, and the posterior commissures. So this is diagram at 10 week of development, and with this diagram you can see from the area of the archipedium different commissural fibers are developing. This is developing corpus callosum, this is developing hippocampal commissure, and this is developing anterior commissure and also the optic chiasma. Posteriorly, in the most dorsal and the cranial part of the diencephalon, you can see the habenular commissure and posterior commissure are present in connection to the pineal body. So this is the diagram at the 16th week of development, in which you can see the commissures has been further modified and they have developed. So these all the area, this is the corpus callosum, its genu, its body, and all the area of the corpus callosum have been developed. Also you can see these are the hippocampal commissure, the anterior commissure, and the optic chiasma. Here you can see the habenular commissure and the posterior commissure are present. These are in relation to the pineal body. So this is the median section showing formation of the commissure. The metencephalon give rise to commissural tracts that integrate the activities of the left and right cerebral hemispheres. Again, another beautiful diagram. You can see developing commissures in lamina terminalis. This is the hippocampal commissure along with corpus callosum. and in this area you can see anterior commissure, then optic commissure. These are area of the diencephalon. This is the cavity which is third ventricle where thalamus is present, and here the hypothalamus is present, and here the epithalamus is present. And in area of epithalamus you can see habenular commissure and the posterior commissure. So this is the section of the B and C which are taken from this area. In this you can see the roof plate where the choroidal plexus is forming, and here you can see the pallium is developing, and these are the area, the thalami, the hypothalami, the corpus striatum is developing. In this diagram also you can see these are the area of the thalamus, and these are the two portions of the corpus striatum, the dorsomedial and ventrolateral portion, in between which you can see the internal capsule is developing. So this is the choroid plexus which is forming in the lateral and the third ventricle, and this is the cerebral cortex which is developing. Again, in this diagram you can see these are the cerebral hemispheres which are forming, and here the foramen of Monro or interventricular foramen is present. This is the lamina terminalis where you can see optic chiasma and infundibulum, and here you can see mammillary body is forming, and this area is hypothalamic sulcus which divides the thalamus and separates the thalamus from the hypothalamus, and this is the epithalamus, and here you can see this is the epithalamic sulcus which separates the epithalamus from the thalamus. So epithalamus will form the pineal body, the habenular and the posterior commissures. So again all of these structure you can see in this diagram as well. So here you can see the corpus callosum which is forming, in this dotted area also shows different parts of the corpus callosum. Here you can see this is the choroid plexus present in the roof of the diencephalon. Here you can see posterior commissure, then pineal body, then habenular commissure, and these are the parts of the midbrain forming the superior and inferior colliculi. Anteriorly you can see this is corpus callosum, then you can see the septum pellucidum is developing. Here you can see anterior commissure is forming, then in lamina terminalis, then the optic chiasma, and then the hypophysis cerebri, hypophyseal stalk is there, and then the mammillary bodies. So these are the areas which are forming the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. So different commissures, the anterior commissures are first commissure to develop, runs in the lamina terminalis and connect the olfactory and temporal lobe of the two sides. The hippocampal commissure are the fornix. Second commissure to develop, fiber is rise in hippocampus and converge on the lamina terminalis. The third is the corpus callosum. This is the third commissure to develop, largest and most important, appears by 10th week of development, connects the non-olfactory areas of the right and the left cortex, and as a result of the continuous expansion of neopallium, it extends anteriorly and then posteriorly arching over the roof of the third ventricle. So these are different commissures. The cerebral hemisphere, the remains of lamina terminalis which lie between the corpus callosum and the fornix become stretched out to form thin septum, that is septum pellucidum. Optic chiasma will also formed in the inferior part of the lamina terminalis, also contain fiber from the medial half of the retinae, both the retinae. The fiber crosses the midline to join the optic tract of the opposite sides. So here I complete my today's class. These are references: the Langman's Medical Embryology, Developing Human by Keith Elmore, and Gray's Anatomy by the Susan Stranding, the 40th edition. In the next class, we will inshallah complete the congenital anomalies along with development of the autonomic nervous system. And till then, thank you very much for your attention for the today's class. Until then, Allah Hafiz.